I'm Alex Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and my own father called the police to have me thrown out of a house he had no idea I'd owned for the past 5 years. Before I tell you about the look on his face when the cops told him he was the one who had to leave, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. It all came to a head on a Tuesday, just a regular Tuesday in October. The kind where the air is getting crisp and the leaves are turning brilliant shades of orange and red. The kind of day that's supposed to feel peaceful. But in my family, peace was just the quiet time between storms. We were at my parents' house, the house I grew up in, the house my grandmother raised me in, really, for what my mother, Diane, had chirped over the phone was a family dinner. That phrase was always a red flag, a beautifully wrapped invitation to a firing squad. In my family dinner meant there was an agenda, and I was usually on it. The tension was so thick you could have cut it with the steak knives on the table. My father, Richard, was holding court at the head of the table, his voice a little too loud, a little too confident, the way it always got when he was either bluffing at a poker table or about to ask for something. My younger brother, Ethan, the eternal golden child, was there with his new girlfriend, Maya. She was a piece of work, glued to her phone, occasionally looking up to offer a vapid smile that didn't reach her eyes. My own girlfriend, the love of my life, Jessica, sat beside me, her hand resting on my knee under the table. She was my silent anchor in the storm I knew was brewing. I'd heard whispers. My best friend and business partner, Trevor, had given me a heads up a few days prior. My parents were in trouble again. Deep trouble. But this time it was different. This time they were about to lose everything, and they were going to do it by trying to sell something that wasn't theirs to sell. I kept my questions calm, measured. I let them finish their self-congratulatory toast to new beginnings. Then I placed my fork down. "So, I heard you're looking to refinance the house," I said, keeping my eyes locked on my father. Richard puffed out his chest. The man was 62 but still carried the bluster of a college football player who never quite left the field. "That's right. We found a great opportunity. A private investor who sees our potential." "A private investor?" I asked, my voice still even, betraying none of the cold dread coiling in my stomach. "Not a bank." That's when it happened. His face turned a dark, blotchy red. He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump and my mother flinch. "What's it to you, Alex? Always sniffing around, always judging. You're a pathetic 38-year-old leech. You just hang around, waiting for us to fail. Well, we don't need you. Get out. Get out of my house." The room went silent. Ethan looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his mashed potatoes. Diane wrung her hands, her knuckles white. Jessica's grip on my knee tightened, a silent message of support, and I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was cold, tired, and full of 5 years of secrets. "Your house," I said, the laughter dying in my throat. "That's funny." Richard's eyes bulged. "What's so funny?" "I've had enough of your disrespect." He fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking with rage. "That's it. I'm calling the police. We'll have you arrested for trespassing." He actually did it. He dialed 911. As he barked into the phone about his vagrant son, who was refusing to leave, I just sat there. I didn't move. I just unlocked my own phone, my thumb hovering over a single file. The police were on their way, and my father had no idea he had just called them on himself. To understand why I laughed, why that moment felt less like a tragedy and more like a grim, inevitable punchline, you have to go back 5 years. Back then, I was 33. On paper, I was the American dream. I'd built a successful commercial real estate investment firm from the ground up with my best friend from college, Trevor. We had a knack for seeing value where others saw urban decay. We worked insane hours, took calculated risks, and it paid off. I had a life I was proud of, a life I had built with my own 2 hands, brick by brick, far from the suffocating shadow of my family. My relationship with my parents has always been complicated. That's the polite word. Toxic is probably more accurate. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who got good grades and never caused a ripple. Ethan was the golden child. He was the musician, the artist, the free spirit. He could do no wrong, even when he was crashing his second-hand car, flunking out of a liberal arts college my parents paid a fortune for, or borrowing money he never intended to pay back. My parents saw his recklessness as passion. They saw my stability as boring. I remember my 16th birthday. I'd wanted a specific, rare book on architecture. I'd circled it in a catalog for months. Instead, my father gave me $100 bill and a gruff, "Don't spend it all in one place." Later that week, for no reason at all, he bought Ethan a brand new, top-of-the-line electric guitar because Ethan had mentioned offhandedly that he was feeling inspired. That was the dynamic. I got cash, he got grand gestures. I was an obligation, he was a passion project. My father, a once-respected surgeon whose hands were now shakier than they should be, never missed a chance to tell me that playing with buildings wasn't a real job. My mother, a former university administrator who prided herself on her intelligence, would just sigh and say, "Be nice to your brother, Alex. He's sensitive." Sensitive was their code word for irresponsible. One rainy Thursday 5 years ago, I got a call from Dr. Patricia Reynolds. She's my godmother, a close family friend, and the one person in that orbit I trusted completely. She was our family doctor, and she'd seen everything. She sounded worried. "Alex," she said, her voice low and urgent, "you need to come see me. It's about your parents." I met her at her office. The place smelled of old books and antiseptic, a scent that had always meant safety and truth to me. She didn't waste time. She slid a thick manila folder across her polished mahogany desk. It wasn't a medical chart. It was full of letters from banks, collection agencies, and a very familiar casino in Atlantic City. My father's weekend hobby wasn't a hobby. It was a full-blown addiction. He had gambled away their savings, their retirement, everything. They were over $750,000 in debt, and the bank was foreclosing on the house in 30 days. I felt a strange, cold numbness spread through my chest. There was anger, of course, a white-hot rage at my father's selfishness and my mother's weak, pathetic enabling. But underneath it, there was a deep, aching sadness, and a sense of crushing duty. That house, it wasn't just a house. It was the only real home I'd ever known. My parents were often absent when I was a kid, busy with their careers and a social life that never seemed to include their quiet, bookish son. It was my grandmother, my dad's mom, who raised me in that house. She was the one who taught me how to read using the newspaper's business section. She was the one who taught me how to ride a bike, patiently picking me up every time I fell. She was the one who taught me how to stand up for myself. Her garden in the backyard, with its rows of stubborn tomatoes and fragrant roses, was my sanctuary. Before she passed away from cancer, when I was 17, she made me promise her something. She was frail, lying in a hospital bed they'd set up in the living room, but her eyes were still sharp. We were looking out the window at the old oak tree in the front yard. She took my hand, her skin as soft and thin as paper. "This house is the heart of our family, Alex," she'd said, her voice a reedy whisper. "It's seen joy and sorrow. It's seen your grandfather off to war and welcomed him home. It saw your father born. It's soaked in our history. You have a good head on your shoulders. You're the strong one. Promise me you'll always protect it." I was just a teenager then, consumed with my own awkward world. I didn't fully understand the weight of her words, but I promised. Now, sitting in Dr. Reynolds' office, that promise echoed in my ears, a solemn vow. I couldn't let them lose it. I couldn't let my father's demons destroy the last piece of my grandmother I had left. So I did something no one saw coming. I went to Trevor. We were in our office, high above the city, looking out at the skyline we were helping to shape. I laid out the whole ugly story. He listened, his face grim, his usual joking demeanor gone. "Man, that's rough," he said, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want to do? You can't just give them the money. Your dad will just see it as the biggest poker chip he's ever had." "I know," I said, the plan already forming in my mind, cold and clear. "I'm not going to give them a dime. I'm going to buy the house." Trevor blinked. Buy it? Like, from the bank. Exactly. They're about to foreclose. It's a distressed asset. The bank just wants it off their books. We can get it for pennies on the dollar. Through a series of shell companies our firm used for anonymous acquisitions, we approached the bank. Trevor handled the negotiations. It was just another deal for him, another line item on a spreadsheet. For me, it was everything. A week later, it was done. The bank was happy. Officially, the house now belonged to a numbered LLC I controlled. The next step was the hardest. I had to face them. I went over to the house. They were a mess. My father was a ghost, shuffling around in his bathrobe in the middle of the afternoon, avoiding my eyes. My mother had been crying, her face puffy. They told me they were going to lose everything, their voices full of self-pity. There was no apology, no accountability, just despair. I took a deep breath and delivered the performance of a lifetime. I've spoken to some contacts. I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I managed to get the bank to agree to a new arrangement, a special forbearance. They're going to put the foreclosure on hold. You can stay here. You just have to work with them on a payment plan. The relief on their faces was palpable. My mother burst into tears, hugging me with a strength I didn't know she had. "Oh, Alex, you saved us. I knew you wouldn't let us down." My father just grunted, the first spark of his old arrogance returning. "About time you used those contacts of yours for something useful," he said. "No thank you. No gratitude. Just a backhanded insult." That was my father. Only Dr. Reynolds knew the full truth. I met with her afterward. "Are you sure about this, Alex?" she asked, her eyes searching mine with a doctor's analytical gaze. "Letting them believe they're still in control? That they're working with the bank? It's a dangerous deception. It's the only way," I told her, trying to convince myself as much as her. "If they know I own it, my father's pride will never recover, and my mother will just see me as a walking ATM. This way, they have to believe they're fixing their own mess. It might force them to finally take some responsibility." She sighed, a long, weary sound. "I hope you're right," she said. "But pride and addiction are powerful forces. Be careful, Alex. This secret is a heavy thing to carry." She was right. For 5 years, the fragile piece held. I paid the property taxes and the homeowner's insurance through the LLC. They lived rent-free, believing they were making tiny, symbolic payments to a forgiving bank. I kept my distance, checking in just enough to make sure the house was still standing. I poured myself into my work, into my relationship with Jessica, a brilliant, beautiful architect who saw the man I was, not the family I came from. I tried to build a life where their chaos couldn't touch me. But chaos has a way of seeping through the cracks. The signs started slowly, like a fever that creeps up on you. My father started talking about a new friend he'd made at the casino, a manager named Connor Blackwell who treated him like a high roller. He was getting that old, dangerous glint in his eye again. My mother, desperate for a financial miracle, got sucked into one of those multi-level marketing schemes run by a slick guru named Vanessa Sterling. She started hosting investment seminars in the living room, the same living room where my grandmother taught me to play chess. The final straw came in the form of an alert from Trevor. "Dude, you need to see this," he texted me, followed by a link to a public filing. A loan application. A big one. It was from a shady private lending company known for its predatory rates and its ties to the criminal underworld. And the collateral they had listed? My house. My grandmother's house. They were trying to borrow against an asset they didn't own. They were about to hand the keys to my home over to loan sharks. The promise I made to my grandmother screamed in my head. Protect it. I knew then that the 5-year charade was over. I had tried the quiet way. I had tried to give them dignity. But as Dr. Reynolds had warned, their pride and addiction were too strong. They hadn't learned a thing. They had seen my secret act of mercy not as a lifeline, but as a safety net they could abuse without consequence. That's why I agreed to that family dinner. I knew it was a setup. They were going to announce their brilliant new financial plan and expect me to either applaud or get out of the way. I went there prepared for a fight. I went there to end it. So when my father, his face contorted with rage, called me a leech and told me to get out of his house, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hurt. All I felt was the cold, hard weight of the truth I was about to drop on their heads. A truth that had been sitting in a digital file on my phone for 5 long years, just waiting for this exact moment. The weeks leading up to that disastrous dinner felt like watching a train wreck in slow motion, and I was the only one who could see it coming. The first real warning sign, after Trevor's initial alert about the loan application, was a deeply unsettling call from Jessica. She was at a site meeting for a new downtown project, and she sounded disturbed, her professional calm completely rattled. "Alex, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice low, as if she was afraid of being overheard. "I was just talking to one of the contractors, a good guy, been in the business for 30 years. He was complaining about his mother-in-law getting scammed. She just lost her house, a place she'd lived in her whole life. A cold feeling, sharp and unpleasant, washed over me. Scammed how? Some private lending company," she said. "They got her to sign some papers she didn't understand. A loan against her house with insane interest rates. She missed one payment and they foreclosed. Just like that. The whole thing took less than 3 months. My mind was racing. What was the name of the company? Jess?" She paused, trying to remember. Something with a B. Black something. Blackwell. That was it. Blackwell Holdings. Connor Blackwell. The high-roller casino manager. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a business model. My father wasn't just gambling, he was being targeted, groomed. This Connor character wasn't a friend. He was a shark, and he had smelled blood in the water a long time ago. He was using my father's ego and addiction as a leash, leading him right into a trap, with my house as the bait. I hung up the phone and immediately called Trevor. "I need you to drop everything," I said, my voice tight. "I want to know everything about this Blackwell Holdings. I want to know about Connor Blackwell. Find out who they are, what they do, and who else they've done it to. I want a list of their victims. Spare no expense." "Consider it done," Trevor said, his tone all business. He knew this was more than just a deal. Meanwhile, the situation at home was getting worse. I dropped by one afternoon under the pretense of checking a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. The real reason was to gauge the temperature, and what I found was chilling. My mother was in the living room with a group of about 10 other women, all of them around her age, all with the same look of hopeful desperation in their eyes. They were listening with rapt attention to a woman in a sharp white power suit. She was charismatic, with a dazzling smile and a voice that dripped with promises of wealth and empowerment. It was Vanessa Sterling, the MLM guru. She was pointing to a whiteboard covered in complex diagrams of downlines and residual income streams. "It's not about selling a product, ladies," she was saying, her voice resonating with passion. "It's about selling a dream. It's about taking control of your financial destiny. Why should your money just sit there, locked up in your house, doing nothing?" My mother saw me and beamed, her face flushed with excitement. "Alex, come meet Vanessa. She's a genius. She's showing us how to unlock the hidden value in our assets." Vanessa turned her 1,000-watt smile on me, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Alex. Your mother is a very savvy woman. She understands that her home isn't just a place to live. It's a capital resource waiting to be leveraged." I felt sick to my stomach. They were talking about my house, my grandmother's house. They were sitting in her living room, on her furniture, plotting how to hand it over to a scam artist in exchange for a case of miracle face cream and a worthless dream. I looked at the faces of the other women. They were teachers, nurses, retirees. Good people who were being fed a fantasy by a predator in a white suit. I made my excuses and left, the sound of their applause for Vanessa echoing behind me like a death knell. The final piece of the puzzle was Ethan. He'd been dating Maya for a few months, and she was becoming a fixture at the house. She was a social media influencer, or at least that's what she called herself. Her entire life seemed to be a curated collection of photos at fancy restaurants, exclusive parties, and tropical locations she couldn't possibly afford on her own. She seemed nice enough on the surface, but something about her felt off. She was always asking questions. Not normal get-to-know-you questions, but pointed, probing questions about money. So, like, is this house really old? She'd asked me once, as we were both in the kitchen getting drinks. It must be worth a ton, right? Especially in this neighborhood. It has sentimental value, I'd said, shutting down the conversation. Another time she'd asked, do your parents have, like, a lot of investments? Ethan says your dad was a surgeon. They must be loaded. At the time, I brushed it off as the tactless curiosity of a generation that shares everything online. Now it felt sinister. She wasn't making conversation. She was gathering intelligence. The night of the dinner, the air was electric with my parents' manic excitement. They thought they were on the verge of a breakthrough. They believed Connor and Vanessa were their saviors. They had invited me there, I realized with a sickening lurch, not just to inform me, but to gloat. To finally prove to their boring, practical son that their risky, exciting way of life was about to pay off. Ethan was practically bouncing in his seat, his leg jittering under the table. You're not going to believe the plan Mom and Dad have come up with, Alex. It's genius. Absolute genius. Maya sat beside him, a small, knowing smile on her face as she subtly typed on her phone under the table. I watched her, and a cold certainty settled in my gut. She was reporting in. That's when I decided to light the fuse. I couldn't let it go on a second longer. So, I heard you're looking to refinance. I began, my voice calm, cutting through Ethan's excited chatter. I was a little surprised you weren't going through a traditional bank. These private lenders, they can be tricky. Richard's face hardened. This was not part of their script. We know what we're doing, Alex. This isn't one of your boring, play-it-safe deals. This is for people who aren't afraid to take risks. What kind of rates are they giving you? I pressed, ignoring my mother's warning glare. What are the terms? The origination fees? The penalty for early repayment? Did you have a lawyer look at the contract? We don't need a lawyer. Diane chimed in, her voice shrill and defensive. Vanessa said lawyers just complicate things and charge a fortune. And Connor has been a perfect gentleman. He's a friend. A friend. I couldn't help the incredulous tone in my voice. The manager of the casino where Dad lost his life savings is a friend? That's when Richard exploded. The carefully constructed fantasy I was poking holes in couldn't stand the pressure. His rage was the defense mechanism of a man who knew, deep down, that he was a fraud. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, his face a mask of fury. You have no idea what you're talking about, he roared, spittle flying from his lips. Connor respects me. He sees my potential, something you've never done. All you do is look down on us with your fancy job and your perfect life. The insults started flying then, a torrent of resentment that had been building for decades. I was ungrateful. I was cold. I was a disappointment. He dredged up every perceived slight from the last 30 years. And then came the line that sealed his fate. You're a pathetic 38-year-old leech. Get out of my house. He stood there, panting, his face flushed with a sense of victory. He had finally put me in my place. He had asserted his dominance as the king in his castle. He had no idea that the ground he was standing on belonged to me. He thought he was throwing me out. In reality, he was just opening the door for the truth to walk in. I didn't reach for a briefcase full of papers. That's movie stuff. The truth was far more modern and far more humiliating for him. As he screamed and jabbed his finger at the door, I calmly unlocked my phone. The decision was made. The quiet way was over. It was time for the storm. The moment after Richard yelled for me to get out was surreal. It was like the world went into slow motion, the sound dropping out until all I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart. The sound of his heavy, ragged breathing filled the room. My mother looked horrified, her hand fluttering to her mouth as if to stifle a scream. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on a spot on the tablecloth. Maya, for the first time, looked up from her phone, a flicker of genuine surprise, or perhaps concern on her face. Jessica's hand was a rock on my leg, her grip firm, grounding me. I let the silence stretch. I let my father stand there, basking in what he thought was his moment of triumph. Let him feel the full weight of his authority in his house. I watched the smug satisfaction settle on his features. The higher he climbed on his crumbling pedestal, the harder he was going to fall. Then I spoke. My voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. Cha, I said, using the Vietnamese word for father I hadn't used for him in years, a relic from a time before everything broke, a time when he was just my dad. It made him pause, his angry tirade cut short. You can't mortgage something you don't own. He blinked. The train of his fury momentarily derailed. What are you talking about? Of course I own it. I've lived here for 40 years. I built that deck with my own 2 hands. Living somewhere and owning it are 2 different things, I said. I held up my phone and turned the screen towards him. I had the county assessor's webpage open. On the screen was a crystal-clear image. It was a screenshot of the official property record. It showed a satellite map of the lot, the address, the parcel number. And at the bottom, under the bold heading Owner of Record, was a name. Not Richard Mitchell. Not Diane Mitchell. It said, Alexander Mitchell. He squinted, leaning forward over the table, knocking over his water glass in his haste. He didn't have his reading glasses on. What is that? Some kind of fake website? Another one of your tech tricks. You always were a sneaky kid. It's not a trick, I said calmly, my heart hammering. It's a public record. Anyone can look it up. I've owned this house for 5 years. Since the day the bank was going to foreclose and put you on the street. Diane let out a small, strangled gasp. Alex, no. That's not true. That can't be true. We worked out a plan with the bank. You helped us. I did help you, I said, my eyes still locked on my father, who was now swaying slightly on his feet. I bought the mortgage. I became the bank. The plan was me letting you live here, rent-free, hoping you would get your act together. I paid the taxes. I paid the insurance. For 5 years, I have been your landlord, and you never even knew it. The color drained from Richard's face. The bluster, the rage, it all just evaporated, replaced by a stunned, slack-jawed disbelief. He looked from the phone to my face and back again, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing, what he was hearing. It was like his entire reality had been a lie, because it had been. No, he whispered, the word barely audible. You're lying. Am I? I said, my voice hardening. Why don't you ask Dr. Reynolds? She's known the whole time. She helped me set it up. Mentioning his oldest friend, my godmother, the one person he trusted implicitly, was the final blow. He knew I would never lie about that. He knew she would never be part of such a deception unless it was absolutely true. The betrayal he felt must have been immense, but it was a betrayal born of his own actions. That's when he fumbled for his phone, his bravado returning in a desperate, pathetic surge. It was the last gasp of a dying king. I'm calling the police, he stammered, his voice cracking. You forged this. This is fraud. I'll have you arrested. As he spoke to the 911 dispatcher, his story started to unravel. My son. He's trespassing. He's showing me fake documents. He sounded less like an outraged homeowner and more like a cornered, confused animal. 2 police officers, a man and a woman, arrived in what felt like minutes but was probably closer to 15. They were calm, professional. They had that weary, seen-it-all look of people who spend their nights wading through the wreckage of other people's lives. The female officer, whose name tag read Ramirez, took the lead. Okay, folks, what's going on here? She asked, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the overturned water glass, my mother's tear-streaked face, my father's belligerent posture. My father, his confidence bolstered by the presence of uniforms, pointed a shaking finger at me. Officer, this man is trespassing in my home. He's refusing to leave and he's showing me fraudulent documents claiming he owns the place. Officer Ramirez looked at me, her gaze neutral. Sir, is this true? I didn't say a word. I just handed her my phone. The property records are public, officer, I said, my voice steady. You can look up the parcel number yourself on the county website. It's all there. She took the phone. Her partner, Officer Jenkins, a big man with a tired face, pulled out his own department-issued smartphone. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the soft tapping of their fingers on the screens. Felt like an eternity. I could feel every eye in the room on me. My father was vibrating with a mixture of rage and fear. My mother was silently crying. Jessica's hand found mine and squeezed. Then Officer Jenkins looked up. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Officer Ramirez. The eye of the storm was about to pass. The hurricane was about to hit my father directly. Officer Ramirez looked up from my phone, her expression unreadable, a professional mask. She handed it back to me before turning to my father, who was standing there with a look of smug anticipation, expecting her to slap handcuffs on me. Her voice was flat, official, and carried a weight that no amount of shouting ever could. Mr. Mitchell, she said, and the way she said his name made it clear she was no longer addressing him as the victim. We've verified the information. The public record confirms that your son, Alexander Mitchell, is the legal owner of this property. My father stared at her as if she'd just started speaking a foreign language. His smug look dissolved into utter confusion. What? No, that's impossible. There must be a mistake. Check again. The name is Richard Mitchell. I've lived here for 40 years. There's no mistake, sir, Officer Jenkins added, his voice firm but not unkind. He had seen this kind of family implosion before. The deed was transferred and filed with the county 5 years, 3 months, and 12 days ago. According to the law, this is his house. The words hung in the air, devastating and undeniable. The foundation of my father's world, the very floor he was standing on, had just crumbled beneath his feet. The authority he had wielded over us his entire life, the power that came from being the patriarch in his house, was gone. It had been an illusion for half a decade, a fantasy I had foolishly propped up. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, searching for an ally. For someone to confirm this was all a terrible joke. He looked at my mother, who was now sobbing openly, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. He looked at Ethan, who was staring at me with a look of dawning horror and something else, confusion, as if he was seeing me for the first time. He looked at Maya, who was suddenly very busy trying to become invisible, her face pale. This is a trick, Richard finally sputtered, his voice cracking, desperation creeping in. He tricked us. He stole our home. He's a thief. Arrest him. Officer Ramirez took a step forward, her hand held up in a calming gesture. Sir, this is a civil matter. We're not here to sort out your family's history. We're here because you reported a trespasser. But as it turns out, you are the one who is not on the deed. Technically, you are a guest in your son's home. And if he asks you to leave, and you refuse, then you would be the one trespassing. The irony was so thick, so absolute, it was almost poetic. He had called the police to have me thrown out, and in doing so had legally established his own status as a tenant with no rights. His ultimate power play had resulted in his ultimate humiliation. He deflated. All the rage, all the bluster, just vanished, leaving behind a frail, confused old man. He sank into a dining chair, his head in his hands, his whole body trembling. I don't understand, he mumbled into his palms. I just don't understand. And just then, as if on cue from some cosmic playwright with a twisted sense of humor, my phone buzzed, and then buzzed again. It was a series of texts from Trevor. He had been working nonstop since my call. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the first message. Got it. Blackwell Holdings is a shell corp. The money trail leads back to the casino. It's a loan-to-own scam. They target seniors with gambling debts, offer them predatory loans against their homes, and then foreclose within months. It's organized crime, Alex. They have a dozen lawsuits pending against them in 3 states. My blood ran cold. But there was another message right below it. And you're not going to believe this. I ran the name of Ethan's girlfriend, Maya Rodriguez, through a private investigator database. Guess what? She's not just an influencer. She's a spotter. She gets paid a commission for identifying and introducing vulnerable families to operations like this. She has a documented history. She's done this before. Twice. Both families lost their homes. I looked up from my phone. A cold, hard fury solidifying in my chest. The room was still reeling from the first bombshell. I was holding the second one. I took a breath. There was no turning back now. It's worse than you think, I said, my voice ringing with an authority that surprised even me. I read the texts out loud. Every single word. I read about the loan-to-own scam. I read about Connor Blackwell targeting seniors. And then, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, I read about Maya. A spotter, I repeated, my eyes finding hers across the room. Paid a commission to find victims. Every head turned towards Maya. She had gone from pale to ghost white. Her phone clattered from her hand onto the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. Ethan stared at her, his face a mask of utter betrayal and disbelief. Maya, he whispered, his voice cracking. Is that true? Tell me it's not true. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal looking for an escape. She looked at me, at my parents, at the cops. There was no way out. She just grabbed her purse and bolted. She shoved past a stunned Officer Jenkins and ran out the front door into the night, leaving a trail of destruction behind her. The room was left in the aftermath of 2 explosions. The truth about the house and the truth about the conspiracy to steal it. My father was broken. My mother was hysterical. And my brother looked like his entire world had just been burned to the ground. The golden child, the favored son, had brought a viper into their home, and she had been ready to swallow them whole. The power hadn't just shifted. The entire board had been flipped, and all the pieces were scattered on the floor. After Maya fled, a heavy, toxic silence filled the room. It was the kind of silence that's louder than noise, filled with the ghosts of unspoken words and bitter truths. The police officers, seeing that the immediate conflict was over and that this was now a matter for therapists and lawyers, prepared to leave. So, Mr. Mitchell, Officer Ramirez said, looking at me with a hint of something that might have been sympathy. What would you like to do? As the homeowner, you have several options. I looked at my parents. My father was still slumped in the chair, looking like a marionette with its strings cut, staring blankly at the wall. My mother was rocking back and forth, muttering, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. They were pathetic. They were broken. They had hurt me more than anyone in my life. But they were still my parents. Nothing, I said to the officer, my voice hoarse. For now, I just wanted the truth to be on the record. She nodded, understanding. We'll file a report documenting the ownership verification and the events of tonight. It will be a public record. If you need anything else, you have our card. They left, closing the door softly behind them, leaving the 4 of us, me, Jessica, my mother, and Ethan, in the wreckage. My father was there physically, but he had checked out, lost in his own ruined world. For a long time, nobody spoke. The only sound was my mother's quiet, hiccuping sobs. I stood by the fireplace, my hand resting on the cool marble mantelpiece. It was crowded with pictures of Ethan. Ethan at his high school graduation, Ethan with his first guitar, Ethan on a family vacation to Hawaii. There was only one small, faded photo of me, from a trip to the Grand Canyon when I was 10. I was standing off to the side, looking awkward in a too big t-shirt, a forgotten ghost at my own family's feast. Finally, Ethan moved. He walked over to the dining table and picked up Maya's phone from where she dropped it. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He unlocked it. I guess he knew her password, and his face went white as he started scrolling. I could only imagine what he was finding. Texts between her and Connor, probably. Financial transactions. A whole secret life built on lies. He suddenly let out a choked, guttural sound and sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He had seen something that had broken him. He looked up from the phone, his eyes filled with a pain so raw it was hard to look at. He wasn't looking at my parents. He was looking at me. Then he looked at my father. Richard had started muttering again, not to anyone in particular, just into the air. That boy. Always so arrogant, trying to control everything. If he'd just stayed out of it, Connor would have helped us. He had a plan. He was still blaming me. Even now. Even after the truth had been laid bare by the police. After the conspiracy had been exposed. His pride was so twisted that he couldn't see the truth. He couldn't see that I had saved him. He could only see that I had humiliated him. And in that moment something in Ethan snapped. I saw it in his eyes. It was a horrifying flash of recognition. He was looking at our father. A broken man, addicted, delusional, blaming everyone but himself. And he was seeing his own future. He saw the same patterns of entitlement, of irresponsibility, of blaming me for problems he had created. The shock of Maya's betrayal was the spark. But this was the explosion. The carefully constructed identity of the golden child shattered. And he was left staring into the abyss of what he was becoming. He dropped the phone on the table as if it were on fire. He stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and he looked at me. He walked over to me, his steps unsteady. The last time he had approached me, it was with a smug grin, asking for $500 for a can't-miss investment in his friend's band. Now he looked like a drowning man reaching for a life raft. "Alex," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He couldn't seem to say anything else. He just stood there, his defenses gone, his arrogance stripped away, looking at me with the eyes of a lost child. "What, Ethan?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. I need help," he said, the words barely audible, forced from a place of pure terror. "I don't want to be like him." He glanced at our father, a look of genuine fear on his face. It was the first time in our entire lives that he had ever admitted needing anything from me other than my wallet. It was the first time he had ever looked at me as a brother, not a rival or a resource. The old resentments, the years of being second best, the anger at his casual cruelty, they were still there, simmering under the surface. But looking at my brother's shattered face, I saw something new, a chance. A tiny, fragile possibility that something could be salvaged from this train wreck. An alliance, not one born of love or affection, but of shared desperation. He was desperate to escape his own demons, and I was desperate to protect the last piece of my grandmother's legacy. "Okay," I said, my voice firm, the decision solidifying in my mind. "Okay, Ethan, but if we're going to do this, we do it my way. No more lies, no more excuses. For any of you." I looked over at my parents. "That goes for you too. The free ride is over. Things are going to change." My mother looked up, her eyes wide with fear, the fear of the unknown. My father just continued to stare into space. The battle for the house was over. The war for the family had just begun. The 6 months that followed were the hardest and strangest of my life. It wasn't a neat and tidy cleanup with a happy ending montage. It was a messy, painful, and slow process of demolition and reconstruction, like clearing a collapsed building one piece of rubble at a time. The first thing I did was bring in the big guns. My mentor, Harold Blackwood, a retired real estate mogul who was tougher than a $2 steak, was furious when he heard the whole story. He saw the scam by Connor and Vanessa not just as a crime, but as a personal insult to the integrity of the real estate world he'd helped build. "These parasites," he'd growled over the phone, "they give honest people a bad name. We're going to bury them." He made a few calls. Within a week, the district attorney's office had opened a formal investigation into Blackwell Holdings and its affiliates. The police report filed by Officer Ramirez, documenting my ownership and the events of that night, became a key piece of evidence. Trevor worked tirelessly with the DA's office, providing all the financial data he'd uncovered, creating a timeline that was impossible to refute. The house of cards Connor and Vanessa had built started to fall, and it fell fast. The second thing was establishing new rules. Hard rules. A few days after the big blow-up, I called a meeting at the house. I brought Jessica. Dr. Reynolds agreed to be there as a mediator. My parents and Ethan sat on the living room sofa, looking small and defeated. "Here's the deal," I told them, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "You can continue to live in this house. My house. But not for free, and not without conditions." The conditions were non-negotiable. Richard had to enroll in a treatment program for his gambling addiction and see a psychiatrist for a full evaluation. Diane had to attend Al-Anon meetings twice a week for families of addicts to address her decades of codependency. Ethan had to check into a 90-day inpatient rehab facility for his substance abuse issues, which he finally admitted were more than just recreational. "Furthermore," I continued, pulling a document from my briefcase that my lawyer had drafted, "I am setting up a formal, irrevocable trust for this house. Dr. Reynolds has agreed to be the trustee. You will pay a monthly rent to the trust, a fair market rate that you will be responsible for. The trust will handle the property taxes and maintenance. If you fail to meet any of these conditions, if you miss your meetings, if you stop your treatment, if you miss a single rent payment, the trust is legally obligated to evict you. No exceptions. No second chances." My mother cried, silent tears streaming down her face. My father stared at the floor, his jaw tight, but he didn't argue. He had no fight left in him. But Ethan, to my surprise, nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice clear. "I'll do it." His acceptance was the key. With Ethan on board, my parents, feeling utterly cornered and with no other options, reluctantly agreed. The weeks turned into months. Ethan went to rehab. It was brutal. I visited him once about a month in. He looked thin and pale, the shadows under his eyes telling a story of difficult nights. But his eyes themselves were clearer than I'd seen them in years. We didn't talk much. We sat in a sterile common room and played a game of checkers. He told me about his group therapy sessions. I told him about a new project I was working on. The silence between us was filled with unspoken history, but for the first time it wasn't an angry silence. It was a start. My parents began their own journeys. My father was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which, as Dr. Reynolds explained to me later, often fueled his manic risk-taking and depressive episodes. "It explains his behavior, Alex," she told me over coffee one day, her gaze compassionate. "But it doesn't excuse it." The diagnosis gave me context, not closure. He started on medication, and the angry, blustering man I knew began to be replaced by someone quieter, more subdued, a stranger in my father's body. My mother struggled in her Al-Anon meetings. It was hard for her to see her enabling behavior as a problem. To her, it had always been a form of love, of protection. But I was just trying to keep the peace. She'd tell me on the phone, her voice full of confusion. "Peace at any price isn't peace, Mom," I'd say. "It's surrender." Slowly, painfully, she started to learn the difference between helping and hurting. During this time, Jessica was my rock. We spent weekends at the house, my house. We didn't change much inside, but we started working on the backyard. We pulled the thorny weeds that had choked my grandmother's old garden, tilled the soil and planted new flowers, roses, lavender, and a row of stubborn tomatoes, just like she used to have. We sanded and restained the creaky old porch swing. With every weed I pulled, it felt like I was clearing out a piece of the toxic history that had suffocated this place for so long. I was reclaiming my sanctuary. 6 months after that fateful dinner, I got a call from Ethan. He was out of rehab, living in a sober living house across town, and working a part-time job at a coffee shop. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant. "I was wondering, maybe we could all have dinner? At the house? I'd like to cook." I was reluctant, felt too soon, too staged. But Jessica convinced me. "It's a step," she said, taking my hand. "You don't have to run a marathon. Just take one step." So we did. It was awkward. The air was thick with things unsaid. My father was quiet, almost shy. My mother fussed over the food, her nervousness palpable. But it was different. The old dynamics of blame and entitlement were gone. replaced by a fragile, uncertain courtesy. After dinner, Ethan pulled out his guitar. He played a song he'd written in rehab. It was about family, about wounds, and about the faint, terrifying hope of healing. It wasn't a great song musically, but it was honest. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him produce. When he finished, my father cleared his throat. He looked at me, his eyes watery. "Alex," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I'm sorry. For everything." It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't a grand speech. It was a clumsy, broken apology from a clumsy, broken man. But it was the first real apology he had ever given me in my entire life. I didn't rush to hug him. I didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. The wounds were too deep for a simple bandage. I just looked at him, at the father I was only just beginning to know, and I nodded. "That's a start, Dad," I said. "It's a start." It's been over a year now since that first, awkward dinner. Things aren't perfect. They never will be. I've learned that healing isn't a destination you arrive at, like a train pulling into a station. It's a road you decide to walk every day, and some days the road is muddy and full of potholes. My parents still live in the house. They pay their rent to the trust every month. On time. My father continues his therapy and stays on his medication. He has good days and bad days. Some days he's lucid and remorseful. Other days he's distant and lost in a fog of regret. My mother still struggles, but she's learning to set boundaries, both with him and with herself. We have dinner together once a month. Sometimes it's tense. Sometimes, for a fleeting moment, we almost feel like a normal family. Then someone will say the wrong thing or an old memory will surface, and the tension returns. But we keep showing up. Ethan is doing well. He's still sober. He moved into his own small apartment a few months ago. He's now the manager of the coffee shop, and he plays his music at open mic nights on weekends. He's saving up for a recording session. We talk on the phone every week. We're not best friends. There's too much history, too many scars for that. But we're brothers. For the first time, I think we both understand what that means. It means showing up, even when it's hard. It means telling the truth, even when it hurts. As for Connor Blackwell and Vanessa Sterling, their empires came crashing down. The DA's investigation, bolstered by testimony from other families they'd scammed, led to multiple charges of fraud and racketeering. They're both facing serious prison time. Justice, it turns out, can be slow, but it can also be thorough. The house, my grandmother's house, feels different now. It's quieter. The air is lighter. When Jessica and I stay there, it feels like ours. It's no longer a battleground of secrets and resentment. It's just a house again. A place of brick and wood, filled with memories. Some painful, some precious. When I sit on that porch swing, the one we fixed, I can almost hear my grandmother's voice, not in a haunting way, but in a peaceful one, whispering on the breeze. The promise I made to her has been kept. Her heart, the heart of our family, is safe. Looking back, I realized that standing my ground that night wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge or proving my father wrong. It was about drawing a line in the sand. It was about saying, this far and no further. It was about creating a space where the truth, no matter how ugly, could finally come out. Sometimes you have to burn everything down to the foundation to be able to build something new. What we're building now is fragile, uncertain, and a lot of work. But for the first time in my life, it feels real, feels honest. And for me, that's enough. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to make a difficult stand with your own family? It's a tough thing to go through. Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.